Hey everyone, I'm Zach.
And I'm Chris. Thank you for joining us, everyone, and listening to us from all over the interwebs. We are the Random Red Shirt Podcast, and this is our special episode as part of the Captain Picard Week right here on Strange New Pod. We are thrilled and grateful to be part of this wonderful Star Trek event and be part of the wonderful Star Trek podcast community. Thank you.
Yeah, our podcast features discussions and reviews of all things science fiction and pop culture. We discuss things from Star Trek to Star Wars and everything in between. We do discuss a lot about Star Trek, but we talk about a lot of other things as well. We have celebrity guest interviews, and we have a great time, Chris.
Absolutely. That's right, Zach. Even things like Jean-Claude Van Damme, right? And
Yep.
yes, that is Zach's favorite action star.
Yes, indeed.
It's indeed the Karate Kid. We've talked about that and more.
Yeah, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, our fairly newly created YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcast. Just search for the Random Red Shirt Podcast, and you can find us there. So that being said, Chris, this is awesome that we get a chance to be a part of Strange New Pod's Captain Picard Week, and we get a chance to discuss in depth on our portion of the podcast about Captain Picard and his relationship with his bridge crew. And for those of you who have not tuned into our podcast before, we have discussed several different Star Trek series, one for each season that our podcast has been going so far. And in the second season of the podcast, we talked about Star Trek: The Next Generation. We did, I think it was a 3 or 4 part look at the series as a whole. And Chris, I know you mentioned that this man here is your favorite captain in the Star Trek franchise, right?
Yeah, Zach. Yeah, Zach. Thank you. Yeah, he is. He is my favorite captain. Um, in terms of in terms of characters in Star Trek, Captain Picard is really, really, really up there, at the top, neck and neck with Spock for me.
Hmm.
And recently, it's Captain Picard, that has been maybe slightly higher just because I over the recent years, been watching some Picard was out as a series,
Yep.
and
Yep.
have been watching some TNG too. So just really glad that we're talking about Captain Picard, a part of this, and then talking about Captain Picard and his relationship with the other main characters of the show, and especially the bridge crew that is so close to him. How he's shaped the bridge crew, and then how they've had an effect on him too. So it's going to be, I think, a great discussion, and it'll be really, really neat to learn more about Captain Picard in this discussion that we're going to have. Be excellent.
Yeah. And for those of you who have not watched our podcast or listened to it, if you do go back and listen, you will find that I am very, very open about D Space Nine being my favorite Star Trek series. TNG is like 1B right there with DS9. However, even though DS9 is my favorite Star Trek series, Picard 2 is my favorite captain. It's close. I mean,
Yeah.
Cisco's right on his heels, but I grew up watching Picard more than others. For those of you who've never watched Star Trek episodes on VHS back in the day when I had to go to Hollywood Video or Blockbuster Video to rent a VHS of episodes of The Next Generation, it was like 2 episodes, and that's, if it wasn't on TV, that's how I watched Captain Picard and his crew command the Enterprise. So
Yeah.
Picard is special to me too, for many reasons. We're going to get into that. Speaking of that, Chris, I think it's probably a good idea if we start out by talking about Captain Picard himself.
Yeah, that'll be good.
Let's dive into him a little bit. Let's break things down about with him and his command style and the way that he interacts, and we'll kind of maybe go through some of the different characters amongst the bridge crew, to include Geordi. He is on the bridge a fair amount, and then talk about how his relationship with each of those characters has played out over the course of the Next Generation series, even the movies, and as well as recently the Star Trek Picard series, as we prepare for season 3 of Star Trek Picard, coming in just a few days, actually, from the time that this episode will premiere on YouTube. It will be just a few short days once we get the first episodes of season 3. So let's take it away, Chris. Your favorite captain, my favorite captain.
Yeah, so looking forward to it. So Captain Picard, he's the starship captain on the Federation flagship. So, just being the captain of the Federation's flagship, he has to have a great pedigree, be have a great command presence, strong education, all of this experience. So that going in, like the flagship captain, has to be a person of greatness, and we think that he is, because when you think about Captain Picard, right, he has like this mythic like reputation
Yeah.
throughout the Federation. He
Especially
does.
in the new Picard series, right? You see that
Yes.
the way people look at him, it's Admiral Picard, right? And that the things he's done up to that point have carried with him. And so he carries that reputation.
Yeah, absolutely. He's revered by, not only the Federation, but all like a few other alien species too. Like revere him. Um, when I think about at least Captain Picard, his major characteristics for me are that he represents like ideals, like this idealistic person, and he tries to embody and represent that. He, as we all know, he's a thinker, he's cerebral, he's a
Yep.
great diplomat. Of course, he's a great diplomat because he's on the flagship of the Federation and he has
Yeah.
to do all of these negotiations. He is a strategist, and what I love about him too is that he is a philosopher in his own right, and loves studying philosophy. And I think he actually had a quote, and I believe it was to Wesley, where he said, "There is no greater challenge than the study of philosophy." So that's some of the high points where when I think about Captain Picard that I really like. So I did happen to do some readings a little bit on him, and like there's an essay in a philosophy and Star Trek book that I had read called Kant, Confucius, and the Prime Directive, and it had a little bit of Captain Picard in there, and that essay was from Alejandro Barcenas and Steve Bean, and so they discuss Captain Picard. It was interesting. They discuss him in the framework of some of our most like historic philosophers. So which was kind of neat. And so they kind of discussed him in the framework of Confucius. So Confucius had framed Picard as, or not Confucius, those authors had framed him as being like an exemplary example,
Yeah.
like someone that was like revered and looked up to from so many people. Um, and so that the word they termed that was as a jinzu, like that was a word.
Hmm.
Um, and that was the term. So really, really interesting where they say, hey, he's this role model above all role models. And when you think about Picard, yeah, we could kind of see that. Um,
Yeah.
he's got diverse interests in education. He's a student of archaeology, and we see those in a lot of the different episodes in TNG where they're looking at different archaeological sites. He is, he's athletic. He also I totally lost my train of thought. Sorry.
Well, yeah,
But
I mean,
loves
he does.
mysteries.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he does love mysteries. Yeah, for sure. We know the iconic episodes of TNG that involve
Yeah.
him as Dixon Hill, right? Which is
Yeah.
kind of a play off those, 1920s, 1930s, 1940s mystery, stories and so forth.
Yeah, that was those were pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, those all kind of make him a student of music too. He played the flute. So um and Ruskin flute, and so he loved doing that. I did learn that he won the Federation marathon at one point. So he
Mm,
was pretty athletic.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so those are some of the high points of Captain Picard, like as a person. We'll dive into his relationships right now with some of the major bridge crew folks that
But
he does have.
first,
But first,
before we dive into his relationship with the bridge crew, Chris,
oh
we have
yes,
we have to address the elephant in the room. All right. Now, I don't see the elephant here. You may not be there, but there is an elephant in the room right now, in the virtual room. That is, he's all these great things, right? All these different, character stuff. But I want to understand why in the 24th century have they not cured male pattern baldness?
oh goodness gracious, yeah,
Okay, so on our podcast, Chris tends to go into a lot of these philosophical deep thoughts, and I'm talking about things like male pattern baldness and photon torpedoes and stuff. And so, anyways, it's a bit of a humoristic
Yeah.
look. But Picard's not the only bald Federation guy, right?
Right.
Admiral Pressman,
Yeah.
one of Riker's old captains. I think he had a little missing hair action going on there when he appeared, about the Pegasus and so forth. He's not the only one. So we know that this is still a Federation-wide issue. It's not just Picard who turned down some kind of hair treatment.
Yeah.
But anyways, I digress. I do want to say, in all seriousness, no, Chris, when it comes to Captain Picard, you talked about these different attributes of who he is, right? And what makes him the thinker, the diplomat, the strategist, the philosopher. But I think from the moment that the episode The Inner Light happens, right, which may be the most iconic episode in Next Generation. You could argue for Best of Both Worlds and a few others, but The Inner Light is a really impactful episode. And I know we discussed this, you and I talking the other day, and I think that particular event that happens, right, when he's zapped by the alien probe, he learns the Resican flute, like you mentioned, as part of that. It changes him. I think that you really start to see a change in him, and maybe looking at his bridge crew as a little bit more family-like than you did before. And just because of his experience of going through the idea of having a family, or he has a wife, he ends up having kids, he grows old, he has grandkids. That's not stuff he had before that experience in the episode The Inner Light.
Yeah.
So I do think that impacts him. I think it impacts his relationship with some of these crew members that we're going to talk about, his senior staff, his bridge crew, whatever you want to call them. So let's jump into it. Let's take a look at his relationship and how he relates to each of these crew members, and the impact that plays on him as a captain, and just the overall, I guess, culture that he builds on that ship. So let's start with Riker, right? I mean, he is his number one, right?
Yeah, number one. That had to be like one of his most important first decisions as captain. Choosing who's going to be his first officer. So, we learn a little bit about how he chooses like his number one, and I think that was really interesting. So he almost passes Riker up, doesn't he? Like
yeah.
He
does, right? Because it kind of, he almost passes him up, and then he kind of gives Riker a little bit of a test, right? He said, he likes the way that in the records that Riker stood up to Captain DeSoto in order to, ensure Captain DeSoto's safety and everything like that, and the crew safety. And he challenged this former captain that he was under. So that impresses Picard right away, because based on how Riker is through the whole series, as well as what he saw in Riker, that Riker's not a pushover, right? Riker's not a first officer who's just going to be a yes man, who's just going to shut up and color, who's not going to go pound sand, whatever phrase you want to use. Yeah. He's gonna challenge him in a respectful way, but he's going to challenge him. He's going to make sure that the captain realizes that, hey, there could be consequences to your decision. We may want to consider these things. And so I think that's important, because that helps build that deep-seated trust that we know Picard has for Riker.
They have intense trust, right? They have total intense trust with each other that grows and grows and grows throughout TNG. And when I think about Picard, right, we're talking about Picard having these ideals, and Picard recognizes that Riker didn't necessarily follow chain of command when he challenged his former captain, right? Yeah. And that is something maybe like Picard recognized this is in that, because Picard never he doesn't always follow orders either. Picard will, if there's an ideal that is contrary to what the order is, but the ideal is more important, then Picard always sticks to his ideals and his principles. So maybe there's a little bit of that, Picard recognizing that in Riker, going, oh, This is a person where his ideal and his principles of valuing valuing the safety of the crew rose above everything, and that was more important than just following orders or chain of command.
Yeah, I mean, think about it in Star Trek First Contact, right? Their orders are to patrol out in the middle of nowhere, basically looking at comets and dust and everything. And finally, he goes on the bridge and he's like, I'm about to commit a direct violation of our orders. If anyone wishes to do so, anyone wishes to disagree or whatever, it'll be noted in my log. And then they head towards Earth in order to defend Earth against the Borg. And of course, that was the right decision, because what would have happened if the Enterprise hadn't shown up? I mean, those ships were getting decimated.
Yeah.
So you're right. He doesn't. He does what he believes is the right thing. He has followed orders. He does follow orders for the most part, but there are times when those orders he knows aren't right.
Yeah.
And he challenges that. I find it interesting. You know, there was really, as far as my research could tell, there was really only one time where Picard and Riker actually quote unquote fought in front of the crew, and that was in the episode Sarek, when Spock's father comes aboard. Yeah, and he's stricken with what is it? Benzite syndrome, or whatever it's called. Yeah, and so he melds with Picard. Sarek melds with Picard. Picard stays in his quarters, and has all these emotions and stuff. So there's a bit of an asterisk as to why that happened, because with Sarek on board and all the emotions running high and everything, there's a little bit of, I would say, an excuse behind it. But in general, they don't, right? I mean, Riker will challenge things respectfully. He will point out stuff. He will recommend things. And at the end of the day, if Picard chooses to continue to go down a certain path, then he says, okay, we got it. That's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
But then in private, like a good first officer would do, he goes in and says, look, this isn't right, or we should be doing this, or blah, blah, blah. And that's when they have their discussions. That's when they have their discussions that are more appropriate behind closed doors. So Riker's very, very devoted to the Enterprise, obviously, and in particular her captain, in this case, Picard, because Riker has numerous opportunities to get promotion, make captain, and get a ship of his own, but he doesn't do it, does he?
Yeah, no, he doesn't. He stays. He denies those promotions and wants to stay with the Enterprise. So there's definitely something about Riker where it was either he may have realized that this man, Picard, this man is something extremely special.
Yeah.
That he wanted to be around this man as long as he could, to learn everything that he could, because he wasn't going to have that kind of special and unique experience like anywhere else. And maybe there was some recognition there that, hey, even if he accepted promotion and was captain of his own ship, he wasn't going to learn or gain the experiences that he would have on the Enterprise, right? Enterprise being a flagship, Captain being the premier, or Captain Picard being the premier captain of the Federation, right? He wasn't going to get those very kind of special and unique experiences and circumstances.
And honestly, Chris, as the first officer on the Enterprise, that's almost in and of itself, I would say, equivalent, if not maybe better in some instances, than being captain of some random ship. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like maybe Riker felt like, hey, the experience, like I said, the experiences I'm going to get, the mentoring I'm going to get, and even the opportunities that will be there, I may not get that as the captain of some other ship like the Melbourne or the Ares, which are the two ships he's offered command of that he turns down during the actual series itself.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting that Riker's willing to forego continuing his upward trajectory of his career in order to stay with Picard. And I think that speaks incredible volumes to Picard himself. Obviously the Enterprise being the flagship is part of that, but if it was some other captain, I think he could have jumped ship before that.
Yeah, I agree.
And that goes to this idea that they do become very good friends over the years.
Right. Right, because when they did have the when he did have a temporary other captain, I'm trying to remember his name. Ronnie
Uh,
Cox played that captain.
yeah, wasn't it
Yeah,
Captain Jellicoe?
yes, thank you. It was, it was a very an awkward relationship filled with, friction with that
Yeah.
captain and Riker. So, um, I think he would have, like, if Captain Jellicoe was there for a while, I think he would have accepted promotion and went somewhere else.
And honestly, Captain Jellicoe, he was kind of cold in the sense he didn't come across to me as a bad captain.
Mm-hmm.
Like he did expect certain protocols and stuff that should be followed on board a Starfleet vessel to happen, right?
Yeah.
And certain things like that. But I wouldn't say he was an awful captain, but he to Riker, he wasn't Picard.
Right.
He didn't have that same type of relationship. It was, hey, you're the first officer, you're responsible for these things, go do it. It was about duty, and that was it. With
Yeah.
Picard, it's not just about duty, and we learn that, and we'll talk more about that as we get to some of the other characters. But I think I mean, you can let me know if you have another instance that you can think of, but I think the biggest test of Riker's relationship with Picard is when Admiral Pressman shows up, and you have that whole scandal that happened with the Pegasus, right? With the was it a cloaking device
Cloaking
or
device.
some
Yeah.
kind of some kind of technology or something like that, and all of a sudden the ship like reappears inside an asteroid and a bunch of people are killed, and there's this whole issue with I think it was the crew trying to mutiny and all this stuff, and I believe he sticks by Pressman,
Yes.
even though you find out later on he realizes that, and he regrets that he did. He should have stood by it, the rest of the crew, and not by Pressman, because he knows Pressman he was pretty much just, people were dying, he didn't care. He was all
Yeah.
about trying to get this technology to work and so forth. And so this experiment had gone awry, and he wasn't being honest with Picard about it.
Yeah.
He was hiding things and he was withholding things, and Picard was trying to figure out what happened, and Riker wasn't telling him. And there's some friction there, wasn't there? I mean, there was some
Yeah.
friction between him and Picard.
Yeah. There was incredible friction, and you can tell. So that exchange, you could tell, like, how important, for Picard, how important the truth was, um, and how important it was for Picard to know, you know, why did Riker act like he did? Why did Riker do those
Yeah.
actions that he did? What was behind it? And um, what was also important to Picard, and that we later find out in that particular episode, was because they were violating the treaty. They were
Yep.
violating a treaty that was there, and so that was, Picard, when those things get violated, that's a violation of Picard's character, because that's something that he would absolutely, like, not do, right? But
Yep.
that is where, you could see that Picard is searching and searching for that truth, within Riker, and Riker's hesitancy, to kind of open up and tell Captain Picard the truth is, you can see that couple things. You can see that really hurts Picard, because Picard's like thinking, okay, how can I trust this man now? How can I trust him, to be first officer of this entire ship? But you can also see, like, the guilt and shame in Riker, right? Because, in a way, Captain Picard he's calling him out and saying, why is this? I need the truth. And Riker respects Picard so much, that, you know he respects him so much that, even though he's trying to follow his duty by keeping all of these things confidential,
Yeah.
he's got so much respect for this man, where he feels like shame. So that's kind of really interesting. But they do, they get to the truth, and they figure it out, and
Yeah.
they grow stronger.
Yep. And the treaty was the Treaty of Algeron. That was a treaty that
Yeah.
basically it reinforced and redefined the Romulan neutral zone. And on top of that, it also made it where the treaty expressly prohibited the development or use of cloaking device technology by the Federation.
Yeah.
And so there's actually a quote in the episode The Pegasus where Rear Admiral Eric Pressman says that the treaty is the biggest mistake we ever made. It kept us from exploiting a vital area of defense. That treaty has kept us in peace for 60 years. I'm sorry. And now Captain Picard. So it's Captain Picard then says that treaty has kept us in peace for 60 years, and as a Starfleet officer, you're supposed to uphold it. So there goes back to Picard saying, those his values and his principles do align with the Federation probably 95% of the time, I would say. There are times, like we mentioned, right, that they don't. But that was a big deal. That was a really, really big deal that happened. And the fact that Pressman and this crew were doing things to violate this treaty was significant. And I think Riker also has some bit of regret there, right? That he didn't stand up and do what he should have done, which was the right thing. And he has regrets. And that all kind of comes to head in that episode. You see Picard's, I think, almost like a father-like disappointment in Riker that he withheld that information. And so but I think that they get past that, right? They move on past that, and it's pretty smooth sailing for the most part the rest of the way. In fact, Picard becomes his best man during his wedding to Troy in the beginning of Star Trek Nemesis. And it's a very touching toast that Picard gives as his best man. And the sincerity. That's another thing too. I think that, Picard is nothing if not sincere, whether he's upset about something, whether he's happy, whether he's remorseful, whatever the emotions are, he's sincere in those things, right? He's not fake. He doesn't put on this charade as a captain. What you see is what you get with him. Yeah. And I really respect that and admire that about him quite a bit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So, yeah, him and Riker very close. Obviously, I know Picard can't, I think, at times really understand why Riker doesn't want to leave for command. I remember there's an episode where he mentions about, he calls Riker into his ready room and he's like, Will, what the hell are you still doing here? And he's like, excuse me, sir. Like, he's like, you've been offered the Melbourne, right? Yeah. She's a fine ship, Will. And he's like, yeah, but she's not the Enterprise. So there's a tie of the fact that it's the Enterprise. And I think part of it's like, yeah, but it's not the Enterprise. It's not you. I don't think he wants to say that.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah. It's not him, right? There's a one and only Picard. Like he's this idealist, and he's not gonna Riker will not find that anywhere else in the Federation. So yeah.
I would agree with you. Now, I think we should move on and talk about Lieutenant Commander Data. Yeah. Because I think Picard's relationship with Data is a special one. We learn that throughout the series. We see that in the movies and in what Data does in Nemesis. And then we see that again in Star Trek Picard, right? And this tie back to the way that Picard felt about Data. How do you, and maybe I'm the only one, but how do you see Data's view of Picard? Like, how does Data look at Picard in your eyes?
I would think that Data must look at Picard. So I know that he's got to look at Picard like as another father, right? I know he had Dr. Noonien Soong as, his, you could say, father, but Picard has to be something of a definitely another father because Data learns so much from Picard, and Picard is Data's strong advocate on recognizing Data as an individual with individual rights, right? And so for Data, right? So even though he doesn't have emotions, he's seeing this person advocate for him and saying, "Hey, you have rights, Data. You are an individual. You're sentient. You have unlimited possibilities to become what you want to become." So that's how I I kind of see that it's not only a father, but a mentor, um, and someone that Data can always look to be supporting him. So it's got to be like a really, really like special feeling. I say feeling that Data has to feel, but but
Well, I mean, Picard talks about how Data, might be the most human of all of them.
yeah,
Right. So yes, Data may not have emotion. Well, for most of the time, right? We know Data gets
mhm,
an emotion chip in well, is it? I think it's in First Contact when
yeah,
he
yeah.
puts the. No, I'm sorry, take it back. In Star Trek Generations,
Generations,
he
yeah,
gets it in Generations, and he has the issue with it where
fire,
he
yeah,
gets scared, and then
yeah,
Dr. Sarin takes Geordi and all this stuff. He's able in First Contact is where he's able to turn it on, turn it off, and where he's like starting to feel anxiety, whatever. And Picard's like, perhaps Data, you should deactivate your emotion chip for now. And Data's like, good idea, sir. And he clicks it and he's like, done. And Picard's like, there are times that I envy you, Data, stuff like that. I mean, First Contact's my favorite Star Trek movie, just above Wrath of Khan. But
yeah,
yeah, to me, from Picard's perspective, I think Picard, at least it seems as though Picard looks on Data's innocence with kind of like a childlike quality,
yeah,
right? This innocence. He definitely seems to view Data at times almost kind of like a son, you
yeah,
know. Um, and you kind of see that interplay at times when you notice that, because Data does ask Picard a lot of questions about different human type things, right? I mean, he asked Geordi a lot too. Geordi and their friendship's fantastic,
yeah,
but yeah, he definitely has that view of him. Um, his journey to become more human, he's routinely asking Picard's advice on stuff as well. And I think part of that is, because he legitimately he trusts Picard. Um, and he also looks at Picard as the mentor. So Picard's not just a, hey, teach me how to be more human, right? It's a,
yeah,
you're my captain and you're also a mentor to me too. Um,
yeah,
that episode, Measure of a Man, Chris, to me, I think is one of the most important episodes in TNG for Data's journey. And I think for Picard and Data's relationship, it's one of the most important.
yeah. I would say absolutely one of the most important. I
Or at
mean that.
least setting the foundation, right? Because I think it's in season 2. I want to say it's early on in the series. I can't remember if it's season 2 or not. Um, maybe it's season 3. I don't know. I feel like it kind of lays a foundation moving forward for their
Mhm,
relationship.
yeah, because Data realizes, hey, I've got someone that absolutely like has my back no matter what.
Yeah,
In Measure of a Man, which was what which was great, which was great.
I love that episode. It's very, because if you think about it, right? I mean, we could very well be getting to that point at some near future time from where we are right now, where we
Yes.
may be having to ask these same exact questions that are asked in Measure of a Man, which was made back in the late 80s. So,
Yeah.
and here we are 2023, and I don't know that we're that far off from having to start thinking about those kinds of questions.
Yeah. What's the name for it when there's some sort of name when AI becomes sentient? It'll come
Yeah,
back to me at
it's
some point.
it's the
Yeah.
isn't the singularity?
Yes.
Singularity, yeah,
Singularity. Yeah.
where there's no turning back, right?
Yeah.
Where supposedly AI has become smarter than all human history or something along those lines. But
Yeah.
that's scary to think about.
Yeah.
As long as they don't name it Skynet, I think we'll be okay. Um, but yeah, I mean, but this isn't. I mean, we'll talk about this when we get into some of the other characters. But
Mhm.
but Data's not the only one that Picard intervenes for. In this case, with Data, he intervenes, right? He's challenging the reasoning of Commander Maddox and that other captain, I can't remember her name, the
Mm.
other Starfleet officers who are just trying to basically say, yeah, he's just a bucket of bolts,
Yeah.
right? He's Starfleet property. We own him, and therefore we can do whatever we want. And
Yeah.
and Picard's like, well, no, 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 I don't think so. Time
Yeah.
out. Um,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know,
that's right.
and the idea of individual freedom, sentientness, making your own decisions, all those types of things are themes and stuff that we can apply to our own lives, not just to an android.
So yeah, absolutely. So I was just thinking about the Measure of a Man episode. There's a later episode that I'm connecting that to. It's where and I forget, but there's some like some drones that that behave like they're sentient, and
Yeah, the
Data
exocomps.
exocomps. Thank you,
Yeah,
thank you.
I think it's the episode, The Quality of Life.
Quality. Right.
Yep.
And Data really wants to protect them, right?
Yep.
And so you can, but Data's kind of um his sense of wanting and a desire to protect them. I feel like he's learned some of that from Captain Picard, right? So Data is an advocate for those exocomps, just as Captain Picard was an advocate for Data. So, that's really Data learned a lot
Yeah.
from Captain Picard. Yeah, yeah,
That's
absolutely.
true, 100%. That's I'm glad you brought that episode up because it's a great episode, period. And I believe in that episode where Picard talks about Data's actions being the most human decision he had ever
Mhm.
um, made up to that point. We know, I mean, the human decision that Data makes to sacrifice himself at the end of Nemesis for Picard,
Yeah,
that to me is the most human decision I think he makes, at that point. I know there's well, how much of his consciousness was really transferred to B4, and they kind of answer that, in the new series Picard. But um,
yeah.
it's also interesting with Data, Chris, the episode, I think it's Redemption Part 2,
Hmm.
where Picard assigns Data as commander of the USS Sutherland, right? Where they have to have all these ships coordinating and doing things.
Yeah,
And then Data has almost a little bit of self-doubt, right? If you think about it, because he asks, if because he's an android, if that makes him unsuitable for command. And this is where you see Picard basically again stand up for Data and be like, "No, you've earned this, so to speak." And I'm paraphrasing, right? But he's earned it, right?
yeah,
He's earned Picard's trust. He knows Data will do the right thing, and so he gives him that because he's earned it, not because he's trying to. Oh, look at me! See, I made this android a commander. Look how great of a captain I am. No, he's doing
yeah,
it because he legitimately thinks Data would do a great job, and he's earned the right to do it.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, and Picard, all he Picard definitely feels protective of Data in
Yeah,
in some parts, right?
like a father.
Like a
Yeah,
father, right? So he recognizes that, yeah, Data has earned the privilege of being a commander. But he also Picard's human and has these like father protective kind of impulses to you, where he might hold back from that kind of decision, right? He's like, no, I don't know if Data's ready for that. How are people going to accept him? And and Picard might kind of feel like hesitant towards that. So I felt that like with Picard, him, um, yeah, really treating Data like as if it was his own son. Like, hey, I don't
yeah.
want anything bad to happen to him. So
That's true.
yeah.
I also think the interaction that Data and Picard have in the stellar cartography room on the Enterprise in Star Trek Generations, the movie,
Hmm.
where Picard shows sympathy towards Data, right? Because he doesn't save Geordi. He gets scared. His emotion ship takes over. He gets scared. And instead of just getting up and being this, kind of badass android who's got all this strength and everything, and I mean, Sauron, he's kind of like Guinan. He's not some superhuman, crazy alien creature. Data could have taken him easily,
Yeah.
but he gets scared. And so you start to see the emotion in Data come out because of his remorseful regret. I mean, Geordi's probably his best friend.
Yeah.
Those two are really super close, right? And so I love what Picard tells him. He basically tells him that, I'm not going to allow you to be restricted from duty or anything. He says, you got to learn to deal with these emotions. Dealing with emotions is part of being human.
Yeah.
Because if you look at it, I don't think Picard looks at Data like just an android. He looks at him like another human being,
Yeah.
a sentient life form. That's what he stuck up for, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was great advice that Picard had.
Yeah.
Because that's only
Picard's
going to
good
make,
at doing that.
yeah, that's only going to make Data stronger, right? If he's able to cope with that and deal with that and understand how to deal with those emotions, for sure.
Yeah. And then I love kind of as we kind of, wrap up Data here, or this part of Data anyways. In the Picard episode in Arcadia Ego Part 2, I think's how you say it.
Mhm.
I wrote down when Picard enters Data's consciousness, and this is a hard episode to watch, in that simulation, and he stands by his side as Data passes away. Notice, for those of you watching this and listening, notice who the one that's standing by Data as Data passes away, quote unquote. It's Picard.
Yeah.
It's not Geordi. It's not Riker. It's not Troy. It's not anybody else. It's Picard. Almost as if a father's losing a son.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really, really hard scene to watch.
Mm-hmm.
You see, I mean, Picard was already grief stricken. We know that when he returns to the Enterprise after Data puts that little beacon on him to transport him back to the Enterprise E in Nemesis, and he realizes the moment he transports back in, he realizes what's happened, and Data sacrificed himself.
Yeah.
We know from the series Picard and at the end of Nemesis the effect that had on Picard.
Yeah.
The Data was willing to do that, right? So for Picard to be there when Data's consciousness goes out, so to speak, or he dies in terms, human terms, that's a big deal, right? I think that's a big deal that Picard's the one that's there when it happens.
Yeah. Yeah. The relationship was definitely special. Different than Data's and Geordi's, of course, but definitely special in its own right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
All right, let's talk about Lieutenant Commander LaForge. I mean, he's not a lieutenant commander when we first meet him, but I would say, Chris, and you can let me know what you think on this. I think of all the main bridge crew members, I think Geordi and Picard's relationship is maybe the least talked about.
I think so.
In episodes, there's some hints to it and things like that, but I think it's maybe the least of all the main characters we're talking about.
There's not a lot of one-on-one like interaction that with Geordi and Picard, not as much as others, I'd say. Yeah.
But we do know that Picard has a significant level of trust in him. Otherwise, I don't think Picard would have promoted him to chief engineer, right?
Of the flagship. Chief engineer of the flagship of the Federation, for sure. Right.
Yeah, because he was not initially the chief engineer of the Enterprise when in season 1, right?
He was on the con, I believe, at the beginning, right? So he was on the con of the ship, and that is interesting. I'd have to go back myself to learn how he transitioned to engineering, but I'm sure Trent, I'm sure Picard must have had something to do with that, something to do with Geordi getting into engineering and then eventually rising to the ranks of chief engineer, of course.
Yeah, I don't remember. I mean, I don't remember there being any kind of a ceremony or anything. I think that was kind of something the writers could have put in where they had like a little ceremony or something in the shuttle bay or whatever to bring Geordi into the fold of being the chief engineer. It just kind of happens. Like he goes from being a red shirt. He goes from being a red shirt that doesn't die, just like Worf was. In fact, I think there's episodes where Geordi and Worf are both at the front, in those two.
Oh, they are.
Yeah. Early on in the show, and then I guess they decided to just do something different with the characters, right?
We got to cross train them,
Well, I mean, for Worf, it helps that Tasha dies, right? She was the chief security person on board the Enterprise. She dies, so Worf kind of gets promoted out of the red shirt command and goes back into the the mustard gold.
Yeah.
The rest of the TNG series, anyways.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, obviously Geordi must have been doing something right to impress Picard enough to be promoted to that chief engineer spot.
And they must have had even though it's not on screen a lot, right? But you remember the episode All Good Things. It's Geordi that visits Picard
Yeah.
at the vineyard, right? And so
Yep.
they have like a very warm, touching reunion there. So there's got to have been like a lot of history and closeness amongst them, even though we don't see that as much, I think, in the series or the films. But it was there. It was there for sure.
Yeah. And in the Picard series episode Maps and Legends, we do find out that Picard still considers LaForge a very loyal colleague. He
Mm.
knows he wouldn't hesitate to join him on a mission, that type of thing. So there is very much an admiration there, a level of respect. To me, I feel like their relationship is a little more colleague than maybe close friend.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, just because the writers never really seem to explore more of a, close relationship with Geordi. There are episodes where him and Geordi talk, and there's some mentorship that goes on, but not nearly to the level of Data or Riker or anything.
Yeah. I'm thinking about all the episode All Good Things again.
Yeah.
Um, I would say on how Geordi feels about Picard. Um, if Geordi hadn't taken Picard in All Good Things to see Data, because Geordi listened to Picard and Picard said, "No, this is you got to help me."
Yeah.
Geordi could have gone like, why don't you get some like I don't maybe help from somewhere else or get some medical attention. He could have
Get some help, dude. Get some help,
help,
old
right?
man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but he didn't. He was like, uh, you know, trust you, right? So that trust was there, and then he brought him to Data, and they got it figured out. So that's another kind of example of this really really strong trust that Picard has with his crew.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Okay. Now we got to get on to the semi-ish, on and off-ish, romance-ish
Yeah.
relationship of the ship, and that's with Dr. Beverly Crusher.
Yes. Beautiful Dr. Beverly Crusher. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Good old Gates McFadden.
Yeah.
So what are some things that you observed, Chris, with Dr. Crusher that stood out to you, and how the writers wrote in their relationship between her and Picard?
Yeah. Well, some of those significant points that I'm sure many of the listeners and viewers know, but Dr. Crusher's like husband Jack died under the command of Captain Picard. And I think I got the name of her husband right, Jack.
Yeah, I think it's
But
Jack. Yep.
yeah. Um. So just the fact that happens, right? So Dr. Crusher and Captain Picard, and her husband Jack, they were all acquaintances, um, in the past. So just the fact that this happened, there's a lot of this complicated history, like in the past there. So how she must have felt about it, right? So, hey, my husband died under command of this captain, and now I'm chief medical officer on this ship.
Yeah.
That's got to feel awkward, like
I
on
would think
her
a little bit. Yeah.
right, like on
Yeah.
her end, and then Captain Picard knowing that she's serving on the ship, and he's got to feel awkward, and not only that, but he's got to feel this sense of responsibility of Jack Dawn. Um, so that's got to be interesting. And then when Captain Picard, um, when he realizes like, oh, they have Wesley, and she has a son, that's got to add another dimension of like, oh, okay, well he didn't grow up with the father, right? Because the father died under my command. So a lot of like backstory there. But they both share this I'd say very strong feelings towards one another. These feelings I'd say they're under the surface for much of the seasons. They do have like a few different flirtations here and there, but for the most part, most of their relationship is platonic, right? Until the end. But you do see them display like hints of of jealousy too, like when they're seeing each other in different relationships, right?
Yeah.
Beverly might be jealous of Captain Picard, and vice versa. So that's kind of interesting and can kind of get humorous too. So I thought that was kind of funny, but very close. And I think they seek each other um for counsel, for special counsel on the things that are really important to them.
Yeah, they share some intimate time together, not
Yeah.
like romantic, but intimate time because there are believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, several episodes where they're having like breakfast together in the morning.
Yeah.
Like as if it's as if it's basically like a routine, right? That they have
Yeah.
breakfast, I don't know, every morning, or if they have breakfast a few times a week or whatever. But that seems to be an important time for them because they can kind of share each other's, share thoughts with each other. Um, and that really, I think, helps kind of give a little bit of foundation to their relationship as well.
Yeah, it does. It does. It just continues that close counsel that they have with each other, and they can talk to each other like with topics that they can't talk to with anyone else. So
Yeah.
um so that's needed for sure. That's needed. There's some humorous moments I think between them, like uh when Captain Picard has his different relationships with other people, like with I want to say Vosh was one, and when Dr. Crusher like discovers that, oh, he's got this romantic relationship with Vosh. I think
Yeah, a little side hustle action.
yeah, I think she was kind of like taken aback, like, oh well, I didn't know that, and so
And
so
then there's
yeah,
the female scientist, I think, that comes on board that teaches
yes,
them how to play that piano, and they share music together. And it was like this one episode kind of, I don't know, fling or whatever.
yeah,
I actually really enjoyed the chemistry of his character with that woman. I would have liked to have seen them bring her back, or her been a part of the crew, and maybe them have like a very I don't know, light relation. I don't know, some kind of relationship. I really enjoyed that character with him quite a
I did
bit.
too. I did too. Um, because in that particular episode, right, she is put in that scientist. She's put into a dangerous situation, I think, on a planet, and he has to make a command decision, and then he realizes, oh, this might really be bad.
Yeah,
Something bad that happened.
because it affects his potential decision making, right? Of, do I make a decision that could save her and not others? And he feels like it might compromise his command ability.
Yeah, yeah, for
But
sure.
yeah, I really thought they clicked. I like that she kept him on his toes, and she brought out his flute playing that
Yes.
he learned in the episode of The Inner Light, right? And he shared that with her. He kind of kept that close hold, but he
Yeah.
opened up. I felt like he opened up to her um quite a bit that he doesn't normally do with other people,
Right.
except maybe Dr. Crusher.
Right. Right.
Him and Dr. Crusher seem to have, I mean, they have, like you mentioned, right, with Jack and everything. They have a relationship that goes a long ways back.
Yeah, they do. There was a key episode, I think probably the most important episode for Captain Picard and Dr. Crusher is called Attached. And I haven't watched that episode in some time, but I know that they became telepathically linked so that they could
Mm,
sense what each other felt. So I think that was a great one where they understood, oh, um, that they were both attracted to each other, and they
yeah.
both had like really really strong feelings for each other. So uh, I think like after that episode, it kind of really really kind of changed things like amongst them. Um, and I do remember that they do kiss, and I want to say it's in All Good Things again. It's one of the last episodes. Um, so Dr. Crusher and the captain, they do kiss. I'm not sure that timeline stays, because I think there's some things that happen in All Good Things where that timeline where they kiss gets erased. But
Yeah.
they explore, like in that alternate timeline, they explore like, hey, they get married in the future, and then they get separated. So
Yeah.
you totally know that they could become um married and romantic together.
Well, I mean, let's talk for a quick second about
Yeah.
the Picard season 3 trailer, right? In that trailer, we see Crusher, and she sends out this communication that she needs help, and she's looking for Jean-Luc. And
Oh, okay.
yeah, and so where are things at with them in the future? I mean, he clearly has feelings for this Romulan woman, right? That was one of his helpers in his vineyard, right? We learned that in season 2 that he actually does have feelings for her.
Yes.
So I don't think him and Beverly have that romantic type of relationship in this timeline where we see them in Picard. So I'll be curious to see, like, when they get back together, what's their relationship look like? Where are things at with them? How did things change after the movies, and after all that's happened, where is their relationship? So that's going to be interesting to see as we look forward into Picard season 3, which is one of the things coming up pretty soon, right? We're going to get some answers very soon here in a few days.
I can't wait. I can't wait to see that. For me, I feel like it should be like Dr. Crusher and Captain Picard should have gotten together.
I agree, Chris. Yeah. I would love to see them end up together. I think it's just, it's like from my time growing up watching Saved by the Bell, and it was Zach Morris and Kelly Kapowski. Those are they had to end up together no matter how many times Slater intervened and wanted Kelly. It always had to be Zach and Kelly. And of course they get married in the movie. Anyways, that's a whole nother topic of conversation. People are rolling their eyes going, what the hell are you talking about, Zach? But anyways, that aside, I am the same way, Chris. I think Picard and Crusher should end up together. So we'll see what the writers do with this in season 3.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the next lady on the staff, and that's Troy.
Yeah.
Yep, Counselor Deanna Troy, the telepath. What do you think about that relationship with Picard and Troy? They don't have any kind of romantic relationship. I think Commander Riker and Picard would come to blows if Troy if Troy and Picard had some kind of relationship, but it's definitely a different relationship than he has with Dr. Crusher.
Yeah. Picard needs Troy because Picard is in all of these different very, very difficult circumstances, right? So he needs her. He's like, for her counsel, like all the time in these situations, like, well, okay, like, he's just like, what are they feeling? What are their intentions? What do you think? Like, and he relies on her to give him the input to make these difficult decisions. So it's almost like she's a second brain that he can rely on, right? So it's like it's this part like, hey, I need her to give me this information so I can navigate my way through this situation, and we can try and make the best of everything, or make the right decision. So it feels like she's an extension of him and essential and part of his thinking, part of his overall like scheme of thinking. He's already like very like Captain Picard's already very like analytical and detached and idealistic and very, very educated. So he's already got all of those things, and with a strong like science background too, right? So he's got all that, and he has the confidence for it too. But in terms of emotion and feelings, I would say go out on a limb a little bit. He's probably not as strong in that sense in situations. So that's like he's got to get that from Counselor Troy. And he's real, you know what I mean? Yeah. After I've been thinking about that for a while. So
yeah, the more you think about it, Chris, the more you realize that her counsel is incredibly important to him.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, she's the counselor aboard the Federation flagship, right? I don't think he would have her as the ship's counselor if he didn't, trust her. And there's a common thread and a theme that for those of you listening and watching may be seen or hearing throughout this episode so far, right? Is that Picard has so much trust in his bridge crew.
Yes.
He has so much trust. The relationship, I believe, and you let me know what you think on this, Chris. I think that the foundation of every relationship that Picard has with each of these members, the first thing is built on trust.
Yeah.
He trusts them to do their job, and they trust him with his mentorship, with his decision making. You know, he has to make decisions that sometimes could result in all of them dying, but they
Yeah.
trust that his values and his principles and everything are right and true, and they would follow him, you know, into death.
Yeah, and
And I think
indeed,
that's
right?
another thing.
Yeah, you're right. And then they do indeed, right? Like you're saying they followed him in First Contact, right? So and hey, I'm gonna disobey a direct order. Here we go, and they follow him. So yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and then Data says, I believe I speak for everyone here, sir, when I say to hell with our orders."
Yeah,
You know, but yeah, you see that. You see, I mean, think about that, right? Picard's assimilated by the Borg. He becomes Locutus. He has all this knowledge in his head of the Federation, their tactics, their procedures, all this stuff that could just wipe the Federation out, basically, right? Uh, and yet they all go in to rescue him, knowing full well that it could result in their lives. But they put their life on the line to go rescue him, even though I don't think the Federation basically tells Riker, these admirals tell him, you know, you got to forget he's gone now, right? And Riker
yeah,
doesn't. Riker, we talked about his relationship, right? They doesn't believe that they should, that they've got to continue. They've got to go get him. He's worth it.
yeah,
And they all follow him. So there's this trust being built up there, and with Troy, they're it's the same thing. You know, her counsel, it's all built on that trust. I think that you know, he wouldn't ask for her input or her thoughts if he didn't believe that they were critically important to helping him make the right decision for his crew and for whatever that situation may be calling for.
yeah, yeah,
So,
absolutely. There,
and
there. Oh, go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, I was just gonna say, you know, then there's Troy's mother.
Yeah, yes, I was just gonna go that.
Yeah,
So yep. Luxana Troy is she's after the captain, to become her prospective like husband. He's
she's after many people, but
yes,
Picard seems to be the apple of her eye.
yes, he's ideal husband material. So that does make for a lot of I felt like comical moments like amongst Troy and Luxana and the captain. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that was I like
Especially,
that.
I love when Troy's mother calls the next crew member we'll talk about here, Mr. Woof instead of Worf. Every time she says Mr. Woof, and then you see Worf's face. Oh gosh, it's hilarious. So
Yeah.
speaking of Mr. Woof, let's
Yes.
talk about him. Let's talk about Lieutenant Worf, because here's another relationship that um is very, I think, touching, you know, because Picard realizes that this individual in Worf, he's fully Klingon. He's raised by humans on Earth. He's the first Klingon in Starfleet, I believe. Uh,
Yes.
he's a bit of an outsider, and Picard, I think, does a lot to give him some leeway in certain respects, right? With being able to follow certain Klingon customs and traditions. I mean, he has his baldric or whatever I think they call it on his uniform. That's not normally a Starfleet thing.
Yeah.
Allows him leeway with some of those things he does. He's allowed to go off the ship and go compete in these Batleth tournaments.
Yeah.
So Picard, you know, if you look at kind of the description of this episode that was advertised by Strange New Pod, we talk about, you know, is Picard too lenient with his crew? Is he too strict, or is he maybe somewhere in between? What do you think? I mean, I think Worf's a good example of what you could use to answer those questions.
Just a quick-
Oh, I think I lost you, Chris. I can't hear you. I don't know what happened to your audio. I think with Worf, I think that Picard gives him leeway because he knows the importance of the Klingon traditions. He knows the importance of the rituals. For a Klingon who was raised by humans on Earth, this guy is so traditional with Klingon values and principles and traditions and all this other stuff like that.
Yeah.
That I think Picard is very understanding of that. And I
Yeah.
think that's one of many things that makes him such a great captain.
Yeah. I was thinking about that too. So Picard is very much like we were talking about Picard. Um, what is a very important aspect of Picard is truth, like truth to each individual and ideals, right? So that is something that Picard tries to teach everyone. So in search of that truth, right? I think Picard recognizes that Worf is a he's a Klingon, of course, but Worf is in search of the truth for who he is. Like Worf is in search of like who am I? What's my truth for being a Klingon serving in the Federation? So Picard's recognition of that, I think, allows Picard to let Worf explore that. Right? He's
Mm.
recognizing, hey, this is an individual in search of his own individual truth of where he fits in amongst both of these organizations and amongst both these cultures. And he's all for that. I think that all played into letting Worf participate in those Klingon events, letting Worf like serve on the Klingon ships temporarily. So I think all of that went into it. And Worf's like Picard backed up Worf so much. Like Picard
Yeah,
was
he was
a
this
huge,
Chadich, right?
yeah, yeah,
On Kronos.
yeah.
That's a huge deal. Here's a human Starfleet captain who is Worf's intermediary between him and the High Council.
Yeah. And
That's big.
that's big. What other captain would do that? I don't know.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. I want to say Cisco, maybe.
I think maybe Cisco.
Maybe.
No?
Would Kirk do that? I mean, Kirk did go and fight Spock in a mock time. Da na
Yeah.
na na na
Yeah.
na 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 na
Yeah.
na na. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, maybe some, but not many.
Yeah.
I think you're right, Chris. Picard, yeah. I mean, Kirk probably wouldn't for Worf because he's Klingon. And
Mm-hmm.
Klingons and Kirk, it's like oil and water. They don't really
Yeah.
go together. You know what I mean? So, yeah, Picard is willing to lay it on the line for his crew because of how important they are to him, and vice versa. They're willing to lay it on the line for him, knowing full well how much they admire and respect him as a captain and as an individual, as a person.
Yeah. When I think about Picard backing up Worf so much, I think this goes to like another episode with Worf where Worf really disappointed Picard, right? If remember that one. So I think there's a dying Romulan, I think in that episode, and Worf refuses to donate the blood for that particular Romulan. And I don't know why it was so important that Romulan live. There's some backstory there. But their ideals or their principles were opposed, right? So Picard was like, hey, there's a way to save this person. Right? There's a way. Worf, I'm asking you. I'm not ordering you. I'm asking you. And look,
No, there's the difference, right?
Yeah.
He's not ordering him; he's asking him, and that's the difference, I think, in this case between a great captain and a good captain.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that puts Picard into that great status.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you're right. He was asking Worf, hey, do this. Look within yourself. Analyze and reflect upon your principles and your values. I'm asking you to make this decision, to help save this person. Worf doesn't end up doing it because, at the time, Worf felt it was against his principles and wouldn't do it.
Right.
But you kind of see that. You see that like, oh, that profound disappointment that Picard has in that moment, right? Like, I mean, you can understand it. He's like, oh, maybe, who knows? Maybe Worf now, maybe the present day Worf, the Worf in the future, Worf in
Well,
the
present
future.
day
Yeah,
Worf meaning Picard season 3,
right.
right?
Picard season 3. Maybe that would be a different Worf that would donate blood to save this person. You don't know.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Well, so you remember the episode where Kern comes on board the ship and he wants Worf to help him commit suicide,
Yeah,
right? Because of something to do with dishonoring his house being dishonored or whatever. He doesn't want to go on, and Worf's willing to go along with it, I believe.
yeah,
And I'm pretty sure him and Picard kind of come to blows over it.
yeah, yeah. 'Cause-
So there are moments where Picard's values and the Klingon aspect of Worf do butt heads.
yeah, and they clash.
They do. And of course, we know that Picard's able to talk him out of certain things. And I believe even in the episode where Worf, remember that those big barrels fall on Worf's back, and you think
Yeah,
his back's all broken,
yeah,
he's paralyzed, and he wants to die too. And Picard's, trying to talk him out of this idea that uh, um, he can make it through, and he's trying to coach him through and that. And Worf just doesn't want to hear it. He believes there's no honor in living that way, and so forth. And so there are some very significant value and culture headbutting going on with Worf and Picard. But at the end, and even like think about this too, in Star Trek First Contact, where they're on the ship and Picard does not want to blow up the Enterprise because he believes that means that the Borg win, and that no matter if that destroys them or not, they're stuck in the past, and he doesn't want to do that. His ego is kind of stepping in, right?
yeah,
And Worf's like, you need to do it, blah blah, and he was and so he wants to kick Worf off the bridge, and he Picard says something to the effect of you want to blow up the ship and run away. He's like, you coward, which is not something you call a Klingon.
yeah,
And Worf steps forward to him and looks him in the eyes and says, if you were any other man, I would kill you where you stand.
yeah,
And then he's like, get off my bridge. So they have another big blow up. Picard and Worf's relationship, I feel like has had its rocky moments. Of all the crew we've talked about so far, Picard and Worf maybe have had the rockiest relationship, yet we know at the end of First Contact that Picard, in his way, apologizes and says, you're probably the bravest man I've ever known.
You make a really good point. You made me think about this a little bit more, and the friction that Picard and Worf have had, and the kind of rockiness they have had. I think we would both agree um in their Worf and Picard can both be extremely stubborn.
Yeah, that's true.
And,
That's actually a good point. Yeah.
yeah, and they are in their own, so we've talked about Picard being idealistic, right? He is, but in Worf's own way, particularly to the positive aspects of Klingon culture and the things like honor, um, and the aspects that Klingon culture holds very, very positive. Worf is very, very idealistic in that, right? You have to have honor, you have to be a warrior. There's certain ways of behavior that a Klingon should do. So he's got those strong ideals, Worf, just being Worf, and Picard does, and so they are gonna clash. When those don't mesh up, they are gonna clash, and that's gonna cause plenty of friction, because that's something that well, from what you said, like made me think about a lot. That's kind of feels like, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
That's a good point. Yeah, I also though know from the series and the movies and now Picard season 3 coming up.
mhm,
Worf and Picard have a deep, deep mutual respect.
yeah,
I mean, Picard and the other characters do too, but I feel like the deep-seated respect because of honor and values and principles and stuff, they both respect the heck out of each other, even though that their values and their principles have come head to head. They respect the fact that each of them is so um deeply rooted in those values. They're deeply rooted in their principles. And I think there's that mutual respect aspect, especially because with Worf, the importance of those things in Klingon culture, he sees that in Picard, I think.
Yeah. They won't compromise on their values or the principles,
Yeah.
right? And that
And
yeah.
yeah. And we know that Picard is highly respected by other Klingons too. He
Mhm.
knows Galron has a huge respect for Picard.
Yeah.
So or for the most part. And I think Picard earns that over and the trust and respect and admiration of others. There's two ways to look at leadership, right? There's people that will respect a supervisor or an individual because of the rank or the position that they hold.
Mm-hmm.
They respect that rank and the position, but not the individual.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's other people that will respect that person in that leadership position because of who they are, not just because of the rank and the position. And as we've gone through all these crew members, these bridge crews, you can definitely tell that the Picard's bridge crew doesn't respect him just because he's the captain.
Yeah.
They respect him for who he is, not the rank and the position he holds.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's important. I think that's an important distinction, right?
Yeah.
When you had Captain Jellicoe with your guy Ronnie Cox on there, I know you're a fan of his.
Yeah.
And I think he's a great actor. You saw the respect that they gave him because he was in the captain's chair and the position and the rank. They didn't respect him as an individual. I mean, they didn't really know him, but they didn't respect him. Not the way they do with Picard.
Yeah.
But that being said, Chris, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention a young individual who was not necessarily part of the bridge crew, but I think we should give an honorable mention to, and that's young Wesley Crusher.
The boy. Yes. Yes, young Wesley Crusher. So yes. Dr. Crusher's son. But
yeah, him and all the ugly sweaters.
Yeah.
Those late 80s sweaters. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I feel like the relationship as it developed between Wesley and Captain Picard. Oh, I mean, there's definitely the feeling of like Captain Picard is his surrogate father.
Yeah.
Right. And Wesley's feelings towards the captain is just Wesley has so much, I would say, awe. It's like it's awe of, oh, this is the great, like, Captain Picard and everything.
And I think that comes from his mom, right? I guarantee you they don't, you don't really see it on screen, but I guarantee you she's relayed that to him about Picard.
Yeah. So he's grown up with this awe of this person, right? Like almost like he's a hero.
Yeah.
And so he's got to have that like sense of wonder, and then all of the things that he's trying to do, like studying to try and get in the academy, or perform his duties on the ship. It's all to kind of impress or live up to Captain Picard's kind of expectations or standards. So I think there's a lot of that too. There was a key episode, right, where Captain Picard's injured. They're on a planet and something happens where Captain Picard is gravely injured, and Wesley has to try and figure the way out and save him and get him help. And there's some special moments there where Wesley says, this is the great Captain Picard, and you're able to think your way through different situations. I'm going to help. I'm going to try and think my way through this so we can be saved. So that's a very bonding kind of episode for the both of them.
But there is an episode, Chris, I think it was called The First Duty.
Yes.
Where Wesley is part of that kind of cover up lie about the student that was in the squadron or whatever, right? And they're doing those maneuvers outside of one of the planets, and there's an accident, he dies, and they try to cover it up like, oh no, it was his fault, he shouldn't have done that. And then come to find out it was actually not. And there's a whole bunch of backstory, and Wesley's part of that. There's some serious disappointment from both his mom, obviously, and Picard, because he was a part of that cover up. He didn't just come out with the truth. He he kind of hid that. And there was, there's some pressure from one of the members played by Robbie Duncan McNeil, nonetheless,
Yes.
who goes on to be Tom Paris in Voyager. Not the same character, but you know what I mean. So what are your thoughts on that, and kind of how Picard viewed Wesley in that light?
Yeah, I felt that that was like you said, Picard was extremely disappointed. But that is when Wesley, I think, started to truly understand the purpose of being in Starfleet.
Mm.
Even though he went a different path. But there's this exchange with Picard and Wesley where Picard says, the first duty of any Starfleet officer is to the truth,
Mm.
to the truth. And when Wesley was entering Starfleet, Picard had given Wesley these books on philosophy, or given him a book on philosophy. And Wesley, I remember that Wesley was saying, like, why do I need these books on like art or philosophy? What am I going to do with this in Starfleet? And Picard says something to the effect of like art, history, philosophy, all of these things. This is not what Starfleet Academy like teaches you. So expand your mind differently from what you're going to learn at Starfleet Academy. And then maybe what you learn at Starfleet Academy will start to make sense, right? Make
Mm.
sense in this broad tapestry of like what it means to exist. Like, so I think it was that at that moment where like, hey, your first duty was to the truth, and then Wesley understands that, oh, I failed. I didn't hold the truth as my first duty, and it disappointed you. So that was, I'm sure that was like so impactful for Wesley Crusher, like after that. But that was, probably the most important realization he had.
Yeah, and there's
Yeah.
an episode, and I don't remember where they're going. I think it's isn't Picard going to have his like his artificial heart worked on or whatever, and doesn't Wesley go with him in the shuttle, and they have
I think
those
you're
those
right. Yeah.
conversations, and
Yeah.
Picard just kind of wants to be in peace and quiet and read or whatever, and Wesley wants to talk all the time. And so of course, one of the things that is a humorous take from TNG that a lot of people love to quote is the "Shut up, Wesley," right? From Picard saying that. I think it's a relationship that has its highs and lows, similar to maybe a father and son at times. But at the end of the
Yeah.
day, I think there is a love that Picard has for Wesley, even though he's not his son. Maybe he kind of
Yeah.
feels like, similar to Data, like almost like another like a son to him,
Yeah.
in a different way. Um, but Wesley is important, and I think that's great, Chris. What you brought up about Picard helping um Wesley to expand his mind, right? And
Yeah.
this just goes to show the lengths that Picard goes to mentor and foster growth in his subordinates, in his crew, in the people that work for him, because the relationships, they're important to him. And if they weren't important to him, he wouldn't do these kinds of things, right? So
Yeah. Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
think that's really critical. And especially with Riker, right? Because with Riker, you know that in the back of his mind, Picard's grooming Riker to eventually become a captain.
Yeah.
He knows that that's the next step for Riker, and so he's doing things. He's mentoring him. He's having these conversations. He's giving Riker the opportunity to be in positions in command and so forth. And obviously, Riker gets that time in command when Picard's assimilated, right, and best of both worlds. He even gets the fourth pip because he doesn't think that Picard's ever coming back, and he's going to be the captain and all that. I think to answer a couple of the questions that we put down as a description for this episode, what do you think? Do you think Picard's too tough on his crew? He's too lax, as in juxtaposed against isn't that what it's called? That word called, yeah.
Yeah.
Against like someone like Captain Jellicoe. What do you think? How do you think Picard is overall with his crew? Do you think he's too tough, or he's too easy, or just right, or what do you think?
Yeah. No, that was great. That was great to put it like in context alongside Captain Jellicoe. I think I do not think Picard is. I think yes, he challenges and he is hard on his senior officers. Absolutely, he is. Um, but I think that is a means of helping them expand and grow and to actualize into something more, right? Because he wants them to become more than what they are right now. I mean, in throughout TNG, like he's got all those staff meetings, right? And they're discussing these important kind of things, and he's asking them each of their opinions. I mean, that's how much he trusts them because he's taking all of their input and
And
putting
that's what a
that
good
into his
leader
decision,
does.
right? Yeah,
That's what a good leader does.
yeah,
He doesn't lead by committee, but he gathers information. He gets input from his trusted advisors, which is his
yes,
bridge crew. Then he makes a decision versus just making a decision in a vacuum.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. He challenged them. He challenges them, I think, in a very, very personal way, which is challenging their principles, challenging them. So, like, it's either reinforcing their principles or making them think about their principles in a different way, or making them develop principles in the first place. So, I think that's incredibly important. I think that's what he does. I don't think he's too hard on them at all. He's definitely. I don't think he's too lax. And I would say with Captain Jellicoe, contrasting that with Captain Jellicoe would be like a different sort of challenge, like you said. It would just be your that crew would be reacting to not with challenging their principles of who they are, but just being challenged to try and meet what Captain Jellicoe like wants to have done on the ship.
Yeah,
And I think
Captain Jellicoe does ask for inputs
yeah,
in the short period of time he's on board the Enterprise, but it's got a different feel to it than Picard.
yeah,
It's very much I just want to hear you say something and then okay, yep, got it, but we're gonna do this anyways or whatever.
yeah,
Whereas Picard, you can tell genuinely wants that input, maybe more
yeah.
than Jellicoe does. So, yeah, I would agree, Chris. I think Picard is a very well balanced leader. I think he's tough when he needs to be tough. He's nurturing when he needs to be nurturing, understanding. And I think, sorry to say this, Captain Kirk fans, I think that's one of the things that makes Picard arguably the greatest captain in Starfleet history. And that it's a little bit hard to say because how much I love Cisco, but um,
we'll yeah, we'll have some Cisco episodes. We'll talk.
yeah, of course, absolutely.
Yeah,
Um, so this has been the Random Red Shirt
yeah.
podcast look at Captain Picard and his relationships with his bridge crew. We really do hope that you've enjoyed this. Thank you so much for listening and tuning in to Captain Picard Week right here on Strange New Pod. We're so thankful and appreciative for them to have us on as guest hosts for an episode as part of this Captain Picard Week, or a couple of weeks, anyways.
Yeah.
And we are super excited here in just a few days from the time of this airing to watch season 3 of Picard and be able to discuss it on future episodes of our podcast, The Random Red Shirt.
I can't wait for that. It's going to be great. This has been great, Zach. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening.
Yeah, this has been awesome. And thank you for hanging out with us. And we hope that you enjoyed it. Look forward to hearing your thoughts as well. And be sure to tune in more to Strange New Pods, Captain Picard Week coming up next with more episodes on the way and more input, other podcasts sharing some great content with you as it relates to Jean-Luc Picard. And if you liked what you saw here from us, be sure to go on to Instagram, Facebook, our YouTube channel, and hit us up there, follow us, subscribe, whatever. Check out other episodes. We deal with a lot of great Star Trek stuff, but also, Chris, we do expand into science fiction and some other pop culture stuff. So,
Do indeed.
yeah, it's great. So thank you so much for listening and watching wherever you are in the world. We hope you are doing well. Take care and enjoy the rest of Captain Picard Week right here on Strange New Pod.